First up is Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, and any of these major Marvel weeks or huge blockbuster franchise weeks, I call a bye week because, you're either going to see it or you're not, and I don't know if anything I say will change that. What I can give you guidance on is setting your expectations or deciding whether or not you should wait till it comes out on Disney Plus because, you've either invested so many hours of your life into seeing all the films and the series and being up to this point, and you're not going to miss this, or you're not going to enter the Marvel universe at the third film in a trilogy in a multi-decade long building of a story. So, that's where that stands, and I fully acknowledge all of those things. I'm just here to set your expectations. I didn't love this movie. I didn't hate this movie, but I didn't walk away from it feeling super satisfied and super, happy about it. And James Gunn, the writer-director, has been relatively clear about, this is the end of like this iteration of the Guardians. And I am actually, a pretty decent James Gunn fan. I liked the first Guardians so much. I really enjoyed it. I like Peacemaker. Didn't love the Suicide Squad. I haven't seen some of his other more horror-y stuff, but generally speaking, first one, super on board, and then it has sort of dwindled because I don't know if he's just gotten more self-indulgent or he feels he has to stick to this formula. I get it. It's the music stuff. He's the music guy, but there are so many sequences that just feel, out of place in terms of trying to shoehorn in a song that, makes the runtime of this thing 2.5 hours long, where I think if he trimmed it instead and kept it like a tight 2 hours, it would have been a much better film. I don't know if he got caught up in feeling like, oh, this is the goodbye to this set of heroes and blah, blah, blah. But there was something about it that just felt, meandering. And I wish there had been more consequences. This is an issue I have with all of the Marvel movies where, especially with a character like Gamora, we lost her for a while. And that would have been good because it packed an emotional punch and it gave them, a stake in the game and actual arcs to deal with. And instead we get this sort of return of a Gamora who's not their Gamora, but she's still Gamora. And it's all, it feels tired at this point, and it feels like they are trying to squeeze something out of this franchise that parts of the story needed to be laid to rest. I do like that they give Rocket a great backstory. I don't know how true it is to the comics, but it's a sucker punch backstory. It'll get you. If you have a soul, you're not, there's no way you're not going to be swayed by it. So that part was well done, I think. But then you've got all this peppered in stuff about, again, the Star-Lord Gamora things. I'm just like, I don't need this. Also, you need to have seen the Guardians, or I highly recommend having seen the Guardians holiday special going into this because it just sort of picks up and it's like, all right, what's going on here? It's the main cast all returns. You've also got the addition of Chukwudi Iwuji, who you might recognize from Peacemaker as the High Evolutionary. Will Poulter joins as Adam Warlock. Sylvester Stallone is back, which is fun. But yeah, it didn't sit with me. It didn't sit particularly well with me. It didn't sit super poorly, but once I walked out of it, I was like, all right, I guess that's it. And sometimes there are Marvel films where I walk out of them and I admit, maybe it's just superhero fatigue at this point, but I've walked out and been like, oh my God, I can't wait to find out what happens next. This one does not leave me with theories for discussion or, feeling further invested in the franchise in a way that other films have been able to accomplish. And I do wonder if some of that is just the stage of this phase of the MCU we're in. But, like I said, it's bloated. There are a lot of auxiliary storylines that we really don't need. I also feel like the humor of it has started to dwindle or feel a little more forced. There are still moments of it that I laughed at. I will fully acknowledge that. But, I don't know. I just felt like there was more pep in their step for the first two, even the second one. But overall, it's fine. It's a Guardians movie. It's nothing more or nothing. It's nothing less than you would expect, but it's also going to be nothing more than you would expect, except for maybe the Rocket stuff. And again, I wish they had just focused on the Rocket stuff, but what are you going to do? So overall, I'm going to give it a 3.3 out of 5. The next film I have is called What's Love Got to Do with It? It's a pretty by-the-book rom-com. It stars Lily James, Shazad Latif, Emma Thompson, who is an absolute delight in it. You've also got Shabana Azmi. Yeah, this was an interesting one. I've mentioned this in a couple of the other roundtables, etc., but I have watched a considerable number of matchmaking and arranged or not arranged, what's the assisted marriage stories recently, both fictional and sort of semi-non-fictional. And this was this one did not necessarily feel like it had a super aggressive perspective on it. The idea is that Lily James plays a young documentarian, and her childhood friend / neighbor, who is Pakistani, and Lily James is white, he decides to get an assisted marriage, and so she documents it to make, a thing. And this is the film school person in me having issue with this, but there are so many times where I was like, that's not how filming works. There's no way she'd be able to get sound in this. Why has she not mic'd this person up? Like, you could not do this with the one person crew. But I don't know if the average citizen would have that level of beef with it. What they might have beef with is I don't know. So the director is Shekhar Kapur. He is from India, but he lives in England. And so, well, not Pakistani. He still comes from like a similar background. And so there is a sort of level of authenticity there. But I think I struggled with it felt almost a little bit judgmental of the assisted marriage stuff, whereas the other things I've been watching did not feel that way. And, it sort of acknowledges that part of it is coming through the perspective of Lily James's character, who is not familiar with the, or understands the sort of history and all that stuff there. But I don't know if of the representations of assisted / like arranged marriage I've seen, like this is the best of them. And I think I, as an audience member, like bristled up against that a little bit. But, at the end of the day, it's still like a by the book rom-com. It's got sweet moments. Emma Thompson, by far the best part of this, without question. I thoroughly enjoyed her performance. She definitely elevates it. But, I'm not running out to say like, hey, oh my God, you have to absolutely watch this. But if you're looking for something kind of sweet and filler-y, it's a tight hour 30, it's not going to hurt you, but you're not going to necessarily be like, oh, this is the greatest romance story of all time. All that being said, I'm going to give it a 3.1 out of 5. Next, I have a new series on Apple TV Plus. It is called Silo. I got semi-obsessed with this series. I really enjoyed it. I was not expecting a ton out of it. I just sort of stumbled onto it, but I got sucked into it. The first few episodes are available now. It's based on a series of books from Hugh Howey, and it takes place in a sort of dystopian future. Rebecca Ferguson stars in it. It also has Rashida Jones, David Oyelowo, Common, and Tim Robbins. Go figure. It's really fascinating, actually. But yeah, so it takes place in a silo, and there's a bunch of people who exist underground, and they've built this whole society, and technology is like at a, barely works, or like a few things work, and everything is regulated, and it is just fascinating to watch. I thought they did a really good job. Rebecca Ferguson, I think, is a great actress, but sometimes, she is supposed to be this very strong character, both physically and, I suppose, emotionally, and there are times where I'm like, physicality wise, she's not the first person I think of. I think she did a good job in this series, but there are times where she's also a producer on it, so I'm like, I can feel a little bit of the maybe a lack of objectivity there. But that aside, I really was fascinated by the story. I think they do a good job of establishing this world and the motivations of people in it, and this mystery, and is there larger stuff going on? I have not enjoyed a show this much in quite a while, and I think sci-fi and sort of that speculative fiction stuff is really hard to do well. And, some of, especially, I will say, like these Apple shows have not done it as successfully as I would have liked in the past. I think C is probably an example of that. But yeah, Silo on Apple TV, definitely give it a watch. And then, speaking of assisted and arranged relationships, the last thing I have this week is called Jewish Matchmaking, and this is not a spinoff, but I guess it's a different variation. It's on Netflix, and they had Indian matchmaking for many seasons, and now they've sort of expanded with this different series, Jewish Matchmaking, which was fascinating to me. I felt myself having to check my own biases a bit more in this one. I think partially because, if people don't know, I am from a culturally Jewish family, and you're dealing with, with Indian matchmaking, for me at least, it's not my culture. And so there's a level of, I don't know if it's voyeurism, but there's a level of removal that allows me to sort of engage in it as a less invested audience member, versus this where I'm like, oh, this is like partially my community in some senses. And there are also a lot more, and the same goes for Indian matchmaking, but being more familiar, I think, in this scenario with some of the levels of religiousness, and some people are just culturally Jewish like me on it, and there's a lot more variation on it than I think Indian matchmaking. And so in some ways that helps the series, and in other ways it makes it a little inconsistent. And I will say the sort of hero of the story, the matchmaker, Eliza Ben Shalom, is not necessarily as compelling a character as Seema Auntie. I think she's polite and pleasant, but I feel like Seema Auntie is a little sassier and tells it like it is, and that's some of the fun of that series. And so this one does not have necessarily as much bite to it. And as a byproduct, I don't know if it is as entertaining. But again, still, if you are already into this type of stuff, it's totally enjoyable. But Jewish Matchmaking is out now on Netflix.